All right, and moving on, the Russia-Ukraine war has escalated. Both sides have increased fresh assaults. Moscow launched a massive barrage on Kyiv and other cities. And this in response to Ukraine's targeting of Russia's oil infrastructure. At least 4 people have been killed in an attack on Ukraine's northeastern Sumy region. Coming a day after a massive Russian attack on the capital, Kyiv left at least 30 dead. The attack on Kyiv is the deadliest Russian strike on Ukrainian capital this year. The scale and spread of destruction had little precedent, even in a war which is now in its 5th year. More than 100 residential buildings had been damaged.
We were sitting in the corridor. It was too late to leave. When the air raid alert went off, we decided not to go outside because the enemy attack had begun.
The attack also comes as Ukraine has increased its own long-range drone operations inside Russia. Russian officials have reported repeated strikes in border regions, while Moscow says its air defense systems. They've intercepted hundreds of Ukrainian drones over the past several days. On Friday, 2 people were killed in Ukrainian strikes on 2 Russian regions close to the border. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky vowed to avenge the latest attacks on Kyiv, and he called on allies to send more air defense. Now, the European Union's top diplomat has proposed new sanctions on Moscow, but the Kremlin vowed to further ramp up pressure on Kyiv, sticking to its no-compromise rhetoric. The Kyiv attack evoked a reaction from US President Donald Trump, who called for a peace deal to end the senseless killings. But Trump offered no concrete route to reach such an agreement, and before his return to office last year, Trump had said that he could solve the Ukraine war within 24 hours. But US efforts to broker a ceasefire, they have failed so far. And to discuss this in greater detail, joining us from Kyiv is Oleksiy Melnik. He is a co-director of Foreign Relations and International Security Program at Razumkov Center in Kyiv. Thank you so much for making time for us and joining us on the broadcast today. Let me get straight to the point. Do you think diplomacy has effectively run its course here, or are we looking at a prolonged war of attrition with no realistic endgame in sight, according to you?
So far, we don't see any clear prospects of the success for diplomacy. And the main problem, as we probably all well aware, is the unwillingness of Vladimir Putin to accept any compromises and insisting that Russia will achieve its objectives by military means.
Now, Russia continues to escalate missile and drone strikes while Ukraine is also hitting targets deep inside Russia. Now, has the conflict entered a cycle of attack and retaliation where perhaps neither side can gain, a decisive advantage, according to you?
Well, that's true. Yeah, that both sides are intensifying their attacks, but there is a huge difference between the objectives and the targets of these attacks. Because if you look at the targets struck by Ukrainian drones and missiles, that's mostly oil refinery, oil transportation, storage systems. That all of this infrastructure is a clear military purpose for supporting, financing Russian war efforts. Instead, Russia attacks mostly civilians in Ukraine, and like the latest attack, among the targets hit by Russian missiles were apartment buildings, post offices, hospitals, etc., etc. And this is kind of a reality, despite Russian leadership claims that they attack only military targets.
I hear you, Mr. Melnik, but having said that, is there any political appetite for compromise anymore? Or have both sides hardened their positions beyond repair?
Ukraine actually made a number of compromises, at least during the last year and a half, because previously our demands were no negotiations before Russian forces on the Ukrainian soil. But now Ukrainian official position, as the position supported by the majority of Ukrainians, is to accept some compromise, like freezing along threading the conflict along the front line, or putting aside for a while the issue of Crimea liberation. But there are certainly red lines like no giving up Ukrainian Euro-Atlantic ambitions, or no demilitarization. What Russia actually demands, actually kind of capitulation asked from the Russian side. And Russia, so far, we don't see any readiness for compromise.
Right, and we've heard the red lines of both the sides quite repeatedly. It has been reiterated over the course of time. But what would it actually take to get Moscow and Kyiv back to, to the negotiating table and engage in a meaningful dialogue which can actually produce some kind of a breakthrough?
Well, in fact, during the last months, President Zelensky made at least a couple of offers for his Russian counterpart to have a bilateral meeting. There was an open letter addressed to President Putin, and there have been a number of statements, public statements, asking and proposing to meet with Putin and discuss either with mediators or just have a direct talk. But instead, the response from Moscow was that President Zelensky had to come to Moscow, which is, sounds very ridiculous and strange. And another fact is that President Putin doesn't see the president of Ukraine as an equal counterpart. He wants to discuss Ukrainian fate with Donald Trump. And this remains up until now, and I think this is one of the main obstacles.
We hear you, Mr. Melnik, and now to give us the other side of the picture, we also have with us Dr. Gilbert Doctorow from Brussels. He's an international affairs analyst, author and historian. Now, Dr. Doctorow, according to you, do you think diplomacy has effectively run its course here, or do you still think that there could be an endgame, there could be a breakthrough in sight which, which could be produced? What's your take on that?
I think diplomacy has outlived its usefulness, and that's not my personal opinion. It's clearly the opinion of the Kremlin. And when the German Minister of Defense Pistorius 2 days ago said the war is entering a critical final phase, he was completely correct, only he misinterpreted which way it's going to end. Up until now, President Putin has pursued a policy of gently of avoiding any major escalation, while his troops have proceeded methodically to grind down not just the Ukrainian army, but to change the demography of the territory of Donbass. As with the assistance of the Ukrainians, each hamlet that was coming under Russian attack was evacuated or orders were given by Kiev to evacuate the populations. So as a result of that, as a result of the destruction of hamlet after hamlet, the demography of Donbass has changed. Now, at the same time, there has been an enormous growing pressure from the West, which has provided latest, most advanced drones and other offensive weapons to Kiev, provided them with the military intelligence to guide them into very destructive attacks on the Russian interior. And it's reached a point that is untenable for the Russians to continue there gradually. And so I expect, as a result of the pressure from hardliners around the Kremlin, as a result of the strategic dangers coming out of the attacks on Russian energy infrastructure, and as a result of the upcoming elections on September 20th to the legislature, in which President Putin's United Russia Party is facing a severe defeat if no change is made in course, I believe in the next several weeks and up until September, the Russians will deliver a decapitation strike on the military and political leadership of Ukraine, ending the war.
We hear you, Dr. Doctorow, and now we understand that the pressure from the West is mounting and Donald Trump has repeatedly called for an end to the war. But has that had any tangible impact on either Moscow or Kyiv, Dr. Doctorow?
In terms, I will not speak for Kiev, but for Moscow, I can say definitively, there is no interest in pursuing a dialogue with Donald Trump is the notion of the Anchorage, Alaska sentiments and agreements has been totally dissipated. This understanding began in November, December of last year, and has taken complete hold of the Kremlin today. Nobody in Moscow believes that Donald Trump can be useful to end this war. It will be ended by a savage Russian attack on the leadership in Ukraine and the capitulation by Ukraine that will follow.
Mr. Melnik, do you agree with that assessment? And now with a few active mediators left, who do you think can realistically bring both sides back to the table?
Partly, I would agree, but partly. First, I agree that Russia and Putin is aimed at further escalation of the conflict. But as a matter of fact, Russia has very little options to escalate except nuclear. Because we've seen already probably everything from drones, like up to 1,000 drones per night, ballistics missiles, so-called Oreshnik strategic ballistic missiles. And it hasn't produced any significant effect on either on Ukrainian leadership or Ukrainian defense capabilities or on Ukrainian society. So what kind of instruments Putin can use for further desescalation? If we talk about the possibility of killing Ukrainian president or Ukrainian commanders, I think Putin should be also well aware that problem is not President Zelensky himself, because President Zelensky, unlike many authoritarian leaders, he is not making decision alone. He has to listen to Ukrainian society, to Ukrainian political elite. So it will not change anything, even if it's going to happen.
Noted, Mr. Melnik, and if negotiations, they do remain frozen and neither side can secure a decisive victory, what does the next year of this war even look like, Dr. Doctorow?
I disagree with my fellow panelist about the ability of Russia to deliver a knockout blow. The amazing thing, when you follow Russian strengths, is that they haven't aimed at anything significant. They hit factories. This is going back a month after when they were responding to the murder of 21 training school teachers in Donbass by several drones. They have struck factories making gunpowder, factories making parts for drones, the addresses of which they knew 5 years ago. They have not knocked out any of the bridges across the Dnieper. Is it that they cannot do it? Of course it's not that they cannot do it. But for reasons that are best known to Vladimir Putin, and I have a good idea of what his reasons were, he has not done any damage to the leadership. Not because he couldn't do it, but he didn't want to. The time wasn't ready yet.
We hear you, Dr. Doctorow, but of course, we are running out of time here. Dr. Doctorow, Mr. Melnik, thank you so much for joining us on the broadcast and sharing your valuable insights with us.
Thank you for having me.